Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. I have another incredible surviving sibling with me. I have Katherine with me today. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here too, Katherine. And today you're going to be sharing about the loss of your brother, Colin. So take us back in time a little bit and share about you. I know you're the older sibling like myself in the story, but tell me a little bit about your family dynamics, you, Colin. Tell us what childhood was like for you guys.
Sure, I'm happy to be here. So, growing up, Colin and I were incredibly close. We only have 4.5 years between us, which I personally think is just the right amount of time because we kind of tail into different grades and schools and things like that together. And growing up was, I would say it was a fairly strict household. We felt like we could be ourselves within the confines of what our parents were their expectations in their lives were. So we were extremely close because when it came to being united against a common front, that was the person who I had beside me. We were also homeschooled. I was homeschooled 4th through 8th grade. He was homeschooled from pre-K through 8th grade. And so for a long time, every day in school, that was the only person that I had sitting there with me. And so we became just naturally extraordinarily close being like that. Even when I would go to college, when he went to college, we still would visit all the time. And I haven't been to a live concert without him since he died. We was always just the two of us and maybe our dad that would go to live concerts together, but it was our thing.
Oh, that's so special. Yeah. I wasn't homeschooled for as long as you, Katherine. Like, wow. But there were times in our life where we were homeschooled because we moved so much. And so if it was like a transition type year, we were homeschooled for like that semester or like maybe that year before we could get into like whatever school my parents wanted me to go to. So I connect with that because your siblings are more than your siblings. They're also your classmates, even though you're in a different grade, right? So it's a
Exactly.
totally different dynamic. So it was just you and Colin. So we're going to talk about this later in the episode. So you can definitely give perspective to people who are the only surviving sibling in their family.
Yes, it was one of the big sort of revelations of therapy post because my brother died in early 2020 and 2 months later, COVID hit and shut everything down. So
Right.
therapy was hard to get by at first until I found someone that would meet me in person. But being a newly only child, I guess is a weird way of putting it, I felt like a weird obligation to be both him and me for my parents. And
Mm-hmm.
having conversations with my mom, for instance, on do I want to have kids? Because suddenly I'm the person who's going to provide kids now, was something that I just had to get comfortable with. And I'm not saying it happened right away. It took maybe a couple of years before I was sitting in the car with her and I was like, are you okay if I don't have kids of my own? And she was like, yes, we're fine with it. But it really turns everything on its head of what you thought your life was going to be and what you had to get done, for lack of
Yeah.
better words.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll chat more about that as we go through your story, but I just wanted to call that out there's so many siblings that listen to this, Katherine, which you were one of them that listened to the show. That is the only surviving sibling. And often people will say, oh my God, it's so much harder than, you know me, I'm not into comparing, but there are different things that come up. So I do want to talk about that in your story. But before we get there, so walk us through Colin and his diagnosis. Take us through that time because you're off to college, you're off having your life goes on, like you said. So you guys were homeschooled, actually, to go back for a second. And then did you go to public school at some point?
So I went back to high school in ninth grade. I wanted to
Okay.
do band and music, and there just wasn't enough in the homeschool community, both in Florida, where I actually live now, and in Virginia, where I was spent the last 15 years.
Right.
So my parents were like, let's just send you to public school. You can go into band. And then he went into high school. He went back to school for 8th grade because he was in 8th grade when I was in 12th grade, and they wanted us to ride the bus together. So we ended up doing that. And then he actually joined the high school marching band as an 8th grader. So we did a lot of marching band stuff together as well. And then after high school, I went to college and we were 4.5 years apart. So I left college and he went into college.
Mm.
And even during all of that, our Facebook messages go back to 2008 or 2009. And I downloaded all of them and I keep them with me. But yeah, even if we weren't, if we were 2.5, 3 hours apart, we were always constant communication all the time, visiting each other all the time. So it never
Yeah.
really, I always used to think about, people would talk about falling out with their siblings or not talking very much with them. And I was like, I can't relate. I have no idea what you're talking about, because he was always the person I could go to for things, life.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. And look, there's so many different sibling relationships. So a lot of us connect with your story where it was like a constant, deep connection. And some of us have more complicated relationships. That's why it's so important we have the representation on the show. So take us through. So you guys are in your 20s at this point when Colin gets diagnosed. And it's a very rare cancer he gets diagnosed with. But I want you to share with us. So walk us through what that was like. He was 24 when this happened?
Correct. So he was diagnosed when he was 23, and then he passed away when he was 24, is
So
how that
fast.
went.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2009, which is just a gastrointestinal, like GI tract. I never honestly looked it up. I think it would have made me sad if I did. So I lived in blissful ignorance a little bit. But late 2018, we were actually going to go to a concert together, and he messaged me. He's like, I think I have gallstones. I'm not going to be able to make it. And I was like, who needs a gallbladder anyway? It's fine. Just get it removed. We'll be fine. And I took my dad to the concert instead. And that's when they got weird numbers with his liver. And they were like, we don't know what's going on. And for about a month, we lived in this like stagnant, like no one knows what's going on. He got diagnosed on my 28th birthday, so December 2018. And then, yeah, he passed away January of 2020. So he put 6 months into fighting. And after 6 months, he went terminal. And then it was just writing it out to the end at that
Okay,
point.
so let's go back again. So in 2009, when because I was diagnosed with something similar to him with that, but like I'm clearly fine. But so that he was having obviously GI issues and things like that, but 9 years went by and he was fine, right?
Yeah,
So when he called you that day and you guys were supposed to go to this concert together, what made him think he had gallstones or something going? Was it something that had happened before or?
I think he just ended up going to the urgent care because he wasn't feeling well. And I think they saw that he was a little bit jaundiced, and they sent him to the ER at that point, because we didn't know if it was an ulcerative colitis thing. We didn't know if maybe his medication was off and he needed to like make medication adjustments. But I just remember that he went that day, and then they sent him to the hospital from there. And then he got all of
Right.
this testing done, and then the numbers were really off. It's hard even, and this may come up in conversation later, it's hard to remember. I feel like I blacked out for that entire 14 months where I'm like, anything could have happened. But I do remember that he texted me saying that he was pretty sure it was gallstones. And then maybe 24 hours later, he was in the hospital being like, they don't know what's going on. And we're a very like solution oriented family. So when we can't figure out what's going on and we can't fix it, we get a little bit miffed about it. So I just remember it being just like this blanket that kind of settled, but we all figured it was going to run its course and everything would be fine. So
Right. Okay, so yeah, so that happens and he's in the hospital and then walk us through like let's go back through that again. So his diagnosis and stuff, was that happening just from what they pulled in the hospital or was he going to see specialists or like what happened?
I believe there were specialists. He went to college at University of Virginia up in Charlottesville, and they have a very good medical program. So that's where he was. He and his girlfriend lived there and were going through care there. I believe he saw a couple of specialists. They thought it was something called PSC at first, which is primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is not bile duct cancer, but it's basically you need to have liver transplant within, I believe, 10 years. And that was going to be my dad was like, that's the worst case scenario. And then I think they just kept on testing it. And eventually they did like MRIs and biopsies and stuff and found some not so great stuff. I think that was the order that it happened. At that point, it was really only a month. And I was working at a hotel at the time. I was working a lot of night shifts. So I wasn't super in communication with my parents super well, just because A, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And B, because I was working so much. But I do believe he
Yeah.
saw a specialist before he got diagnosed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so walk us through him getting diagnosed. Like who finally diagnosed him and like this is like you shared with me before we started chatting with all of you. This is rare what he has. This is not something that a 23, 24-year-old would typically have. So walk us through that part of the
Yeah.
story.
It was so like just shell shocked at first. It was one of those things that doesn't happen to you. And I remember I felt such a need as being that only sibling that was there to remain so steadfast for my parents the entire time that I really don't think I grieved at all, really, until way after the fact, because being strong for my parents was all I was going to do. They were really worried about things. I'd be going home being like, it's going to be fine. We're going to figure it out. Everything's going to be hunky dory. I don't remember I don't think my brother actually said the words to me. I think I just found out through my parents because there was a lot of pressure to keep the relationship just how it had always been for those last 23 years. And I didn't realize how rare it was until he was gone, until people started talking about it more. There was a lot of things that just weren't said in the moment because we were trying to live in the present as much as we could, that I didn't realize how rare it was until after.
If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support. I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.
I totally get that. And I think a lot of people will relate to being strong for your parents. And so it doesn't sound like you were living near him right at this point,
I
Katherine,
was
or what
living
was
about
that like?
2 hours away. I
Yeah.
was living about 2 hours away, traveling and seeing. We would see each other still all the time. I would drive down, or he would drive up, and things like that. It was close enough to where if there was an emergency, I could get down there within a couple of hours, but not so close that I could just go any other day. I still had work. He was still working at that point too. So we were, but I think it would have been different too if didn't have such a strong relationship beforehand. So really, Facebook chatting back and forth was the same vibe as me going down to visit him in person, or vice versa. So it didn't really feel like we lived all that far away.
Yeah. So after he was diagnosed, and tell us again what he was diagnosed with. This was,
It's
I
called
can't say it. I don't
bile
recall.
duct cancer. There's a name for. I think it's a cholangiocarcinoma, but it's a lot of letters. I just call it bile duct cancer because it's the easiest way.
And so after he's diagnosed with this, then did you guys know that this was going to be quick, or like what happened next? Like, was he going to be treated for this? Like, what were the expectations, and what were you guys going through as a family to tackle this? Because that's really what was
Yeah.
happening. And that's what happens with cancer.
So the first thing was, is he eligible for a liver transplant? Let's all get tested. I got tested. My mom got tested. A couple of his friends got tested, and one by one, it just started knocking off the list of why people couldn't do it. I was the first person that got tested, and I was the first person to be told that you can't donate to him, which was devastating beyond belief. I was at work when I found out, and I was like, I can't believe this. He had a couple of friends that could have donated, but they had medical things that were going on as well. He is going through treatment at this point in time. And I remember, I'm not even sure when it was, March or May of that year, my mom was eligible, and she was all the way up to, I drove down there for her appointments with the surgeons to start
Wow.
scheduling. And we had a plan. If we're going to do this, your dad has to be my caregiver, and my brother's girlfriend would be his caregiver. And then I'd go down on the weekends to give them relief while everyone else was going to work. And they had one last test for her. And it was on there was something with her thyroid. So we went and got an ultrasound done. And maybe 2 days later, we found out she couldn't do it. And I was sitting there with her when they were signing the papers of like, here are all the complications from surgery. Here's the chances that you can not survive the surgery. Here's all this like harrowing stuff to be with your mother for. And then for it all to fizzle out into nothing was right there was as much emotional like energy as I could have spent in that year, just in that couple days. So
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh my gosh, to get that close and then realize that you can't, like that must have been, I'm sure that wasn't the end. I'm sure they were still trying to find other people, but
it was the day after his birthday, I believe it was. So he told me that it was terminal on his birthday that year. And then I
which is
texted
when?
July 9th.
Okay. And we're in 2019 or 2020?
2019. He says, I've got a year. They've given me a year to a year and a half. And I'm like, okay, I hate this, but we still get Christmas, we get New Year's, we get Thanksgiving, we get our birthdays, we can still do these things. And after that, it really just became a matter of just talking as much as possible and getting smoothies and doing what we've been doing for so long. And then he died 6 months later. And I have never felt more cheated out of anything in my life. I didn't know at the time, I didn't find out until later that he'd been told 6 months to a year. And he had told me longer. I think it's to keep up the relationship that we'd had for so long. And I get why he did it, but at the same time, I was so mad when it was 6 months and he was gone. I was like, this is the worst. So
yeah. I'm sure you can look back now and understand why he would do that. I'm sure it was so that you would make the most of the time that he was here and that you could plan and do things together, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, and I think he just didn't want me to have to act like I was fine when I wasn't around him, because it is exhausting to put on the face of everything being okay when it's not. And I think he just wanted me to be me all the way through the end, which I love and I appreciate. But in the moment with all those emotions, I just remember feeling this rage towards him.
Yeah. So for those 6 months, what was that like for him? Was he active the whole time or was it a mix? And then at the end, was he in the hospital? Like, walk us through what those 6 months were like for you and that experience, because those of you who have lost a sibling to an anticipatory loss, like that time, there's usually good moments and then there's some moments when things are difficult. And then, lead us up to when he passed and how that was for you.
Yeah, so it happened so slowly. That's the weird thing, is that when it happens slowly, you almost don't realize day to day that anything's changing until one day you wake up and bam, and you're like, whoa, everything's different. And everything was he remained active and we were just doing our thing until around Thanksgiving of that year. I remember going to Thanksgiving and just having this weird feeling that this was going to be like the last Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday. I was like, this is going to be the last Thanksgiving, is how I felt. And then December's rolling along. We have Christmas. Of course, everyone's doing Christmas and Thanksgiving with my family because everything's going on. And he looked really bad. Christmas Day, I think when he and his girlfriend came in, I think he was bleeding out of one of his like ports that he had. And I was like, my mom was like, really, we just didn't know. It just, something didn't feel right. But in my mind, it's 6 months. I've got 6 more months. So I'm like, just got to enjoy the holidays as much as we can. But we were driving from Bedford, Virginia, where my parents live, to Raleigh, where my in-laws live. And I wrote him a letter on my notes app on my phone, because I felt like I had to there was something going on. I had to get out. And that's how I process most of my emotions, is just through writing. And that's when we found out that he was going to go have hospice in his apartment on New Year's Eve. So at that point, I'm telling my bosses at work, and I'm like, this is no longer something that's going to happen in the future. And he was in hospice for 3 weeks. So I went down and visited, I think every weekend I was down there. And one weekend he signed his DNR paperwork, which was difficult to be around for. And then my uncle, family just started trickling in a little bit more and more. I took a leave from work. My parents all took leaves from work and all that stuff. But then the actual day, I drove down from my home. My mom's like, come for an extended visit. I'm like, okay, I know what that means. I'll go for an extended visit. And it was 36 hours from when I arrived to when he died. That 36 hours is what passed, I believe, from that point. And it was so eerie. It was just the eeriest, quiet thing because we're not a loud family. It was just a different vibe in the room. And I don't even think he talked a whole lot. At that point, he basically, I felt like he had one foot in one world and one foot in the other. He was talking about people that were standing in the corner that weren't there. And he was talking about going up the stairs to like something different. And it happened, I think, 3 times that we were like, it's okay. Like you can go. Like we're going to be okay. And then he kept coming back. And then around 2 o'clock in the morning, my mom was like, his breathing is different. And 20 minutes later, he had passed. And it was just the strangest. See, even now, I can't even really put it into words. And it was the weirdest sense of relief and devastation at the same time because you've been grieving this entire time. And you're like, every time he breathed in, I was like, thank God he's still alive, but he's in so much pain. And then he would exhale, and I'm like, I don't want him to die, but he's not in any pain anymore. And it was just back and forth forever. And so when he didn't inhale again, it was just the most cognitive dissonant thing in my brain. I just couldn't even really grasp where I was or what I was doing. But my dad gave me the biggest hug he's ever given me. And up until still happening now, whenever he hugs me hard, I'm just like shot back to that day. And I'm like, just brings back visceral feelings of not knowing what's going on, I guess.
Yeah. When you mentioned your mom said come for an extended stay, did you know when you went that this was probably going to be?
I knew it was probably it. It was snowing and I was supposed to be at work and then they said like, oh, it's snowing. We've canceled your event. And I'm like, well, then I'm going to leave and go down there. And I think I knew, and I can't remember if it was someone who was there who told me or someone at his memorial that told me, but they asked me if I thought he had waited for me to get down there. And I almost think I want to think that he did. One of the things he really wanted to do in like the final hours, he's like, I want to go to a concert. I want to go to a concert. So we were playing music just through my phone and like listening all together, music that he and I had played together. And so I'd like to think that he wanted to make sure I was there first. I don't know.
Yeah. How was that as he was like saying things like it's the staircase and talking to other people? Like what was that experience for you?
I was still looking out for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I was still making sure that my mom was eating and that my dad was like taking a break from his phone and like taking a nap and things like that. I was still making sure that they were, and then his girlfriend, they'd been together for, I don't know, many years. They lived together. They had 2 cats, all this stuff, just making sure that they were all okay. But it was just, I don't know how to describe it. It was crunchy in my brain where it's like you're hearing it, but it's so out of body. It's such a dissociative time where you feel like you're just watching a movie of someone else. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until years later that I was like, oh, that wasn't like I was watching my own life happening in front of my eyes because I'd had dissociation experiences before, but never quite like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which a lot of people can relate to because just death in general doesn't feel like a real experience when we're watching it happen. It's very intense. I understand that. So yeah, so Colin takes his last breath and then 2 in the morning. And so what happens next for you guys? Did you guys did a funeral for him and what was life like after that? Yeah.
So the hospice nurse came to call death 2 hours later. So we were just sitting in his apartment with his body for 2 hours, just sitting there. I really honestly don't remember what it was like. I can't remember what we were doing. So she called death, and 2 hours later, the funeral home came and picked him up. And that's when it became really real. I ended up being with my family maybe for the full weekend. We were down there. We went and talked to the crematory house and we cleaned out his apartment and we did all of that. We had the hospice equipment picked up. We disposed of his medications, all of that kind of stuff. And it was very hazy. It was just one foot in front of the other. We went and had breakfast somewhere. I don't remember where it was, what we ate, anything like that. My husband does say it was the scariest he's ever been of my dad because my dad was so flat and just done that he's like, I've never seen your dad like that. It was so scary. But his memorial was a month later. So we just had a little memorial service at like a church in Charlottesville. And then we had our old teachers from high school were there and all of his friends were there. And I eulogized him, which was awful. But I'll always remember he had a lot of his friends that I hadn't met from college, and they were there, and they all knew who I was because he talked about me all the time. And I never knew it because he's a boy and he never really expressed his emotions very well. But they would say, oh, we traveled to Chicago, and we'd stop and we'd look around, and he was 30 feet the other way because he was taking a picture to send to you, kind of stuff. And that was really that hammered home just that the love went two ways, even though he didn't always say it. So that was really sweet.
Yeah, we don't always hear about that stuff, especially
Yeah.
as the older sister.
Yeah.
As the sister and then the older sister. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I had a similar experience, especially with my brother's girlfriend. They've been together for a couple of years, and she was just telling me so much stuff. And I'm like, oh, he does love me. Okay. Bringing levity to like a really dark situation, right? It's like, oh, yeah. But she told me some sweet stuff too. So I really connect with that part of your story too. Because you're like, oh, they did talk about
Like,
me
oh,
all
yeah,
the
exactly.
time.
It's like, wasn't just me. It wasn't a one-way street here. Like there was,
Yeah.
it just makes you feel like you're actually like, and of all the people to have to feel like you're part of their everyday, it's like that, it's that sibling that's close in age, and you're just like, oh, okay, like and with it being a brother, the boys and their emotions, it's just, yeah, it was just nice.
Yeah. They don't share in the same way, typically, right? Typically, they don't. Yeah. And I think you sharing about your dad too, just as another kind of example of how men just they grieve differently. And it can be, especially the dad and the group, and it can be a
Yeah,
very stoic shutdown experience. And yeah, then that's tough.
yeah. And and with being, and that kind of goes back to the idea of just being the only one that's left. We all grieve in such different ways, and I had already had quite a bit of therapy before this for other past traumas. So when I finally got into therapy, I was like, I felt really safe there, and I was like, I'm just going to, I can air everything out. But my parents, we all grieve at different speeds, and they weren't quite there yet. And so I remember, I don't remember when, but I remember when my parents started wanting to talk about it more, and I had passed that point. So them bringing it up was triggering me to go back when I wasn't quite ready. It was just all the offset speeds. Just it leads to even more challenge in communication than you had before.
Yeah, how interesting. And I think it's good that you're sharing that because you're right. Everybody moves at a different grief speed. And for you, do you remember how long it took you to go to therapy after you lost your brother? Was it pretty quick, or what was your journey?
It was pretty quick. I wanted to go. I had set up it was the memorial was President's Day weekend 2020. And I had set up a therapy appointment for only like a month later. But then COVID hit and everything got canceled. So I didn't get to actually go till June of that year. And
So
once I
yeah, I
went,
mean, we were just everything was virtual, but also things were shut down. And so people
mhm,
really hadn't adjusted 100% yet to that. So that's interesting.
suddenly the whole world was how I was feeling on the inside. Suddenly
Right.
everything was locked down, and but I worked in an essential job. I worked in food service, so I still worked. I still went to work every day. But finally, I found a therapist that was willing to see me in person, because that was the thing. I don't like doing virtual therapy at all. I need to get out of my environment and out of wherever I am to feel like I'm actually able to access that part of me.
Hmm.
And so I needed someone who was going to see me in person, and I finally found someone like 6 months later and started seeing him.
Wow. But you were ready after a month. You would have gone in a month.
I just knew I had a lot of feelings in my head that I didn't know what to do with. And I had such a good experience in therapy for trauma years before, that I just knew, like, if I just get in there and I release the pressure valve a little bit, I'm going to feel so much better. And I didn't even know how to write my problems out. They were so foreign to me. I was like, I just need some non-biased third party to listen to me vent about nonsensical venting. So I think I knew before he died that I was going to need pretty extensive therapy when it happened.
Hmm.
So I was ready for that.
Yeah, and I relate to you, Catherine, because I've always been a journaler. I have an English degree and I have a creative writing degree, and so I've always been a journaler, and that was a red flag for me too. And maybe I should more say a green flag that I needed to go to therapy because I journaled almost every day of my life for so many years since I was like young. Like I have journals back from when I was like 5, 6, 7, like young.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wrote in my journal was my brother's eulogy that I read at his celebration of life. And then there was no entries.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that sometime in like the spring. When I say spring, I mean I'm in the South, right? So I'm more like February, March or something after I lost a good friend of mine. And I was like, time for me to go in and see my therapist. So it was not long for me either. It was like
Yeah.
pretty much right away, because I also connect with that part of your story too. I feel very lucky because I actually saw a therapist that I had been seeing and worked through a lot of trauma from like family stuff and just other things that had happened to me when I was younger. So I was really lucky to have that relationship. So having a positive past therapy experience, I connect with that part too with your story. But I knew, I was like, I'm not myself because I'm not writing anything down. Like nothing's coming out of me, even though everything is in me, nothing's coming out of me. So I really connect with that part too.
And that was something, this therapist that I saw him for about, I'd say, a year. And then I ended up switching to someone else who I saw for like 4.5 years before I moved down to Florida. But this
Wow.
guy, he triggered something in my head because I told him, I said, I'm so mad because I want to write so badly, but all I can write about is death. And all I can write about is being horribly sad. And he's like, well, why don't you sit down and just do that? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And so I had a book, I wrote it in 2020, 2021, but it started off solely as like my grief emotional support novel. And every time I would get out of therapy and I'd be so upset and I'd go and I'd write just stream of conscious, whatever was going on in my head. And it helped so much. It's like I said, you have a pressure cooker and you have to like release that steam every now and then or it's going to keep building up. And it was just like a weekly steam release. And I definitely didn't get it all out. And then the steam builds back up and you get mad about things 2 years ago that you're mad about again and all that. But at least it shows that it helps you realize that you can get through it either way. Move, not forward, but move. I don't know. I relate my brain to a file cabinet. And sometimes the files love to pop up in the front of my brain and sometimes they settle back. So.
Why do you feel like you weren't giving yourself permission to write about death and darkness? It's like your therapist had to open that permission for you. Why do you feel like you weren't giving yourself permission to do that?
I think a lot of me couldn't remember fully what had even happened. And also I think I wasn't giving myself permission to even think about it yet because I was still in those baby stages of like my parents were we were 6 months in. They were still, well, they were completely zoned out in their own world. And I felt the need to protect them from it. And which is unusual, which I guess is ironic because I don't share my writing with anybody outside of publishing it. But or maybe I thought that when I would write about it, I'd finally admit that it happened. I'm not really
Mm,
sure what it was. And I like writing things. I don't know, when I was stream of conscious writing doesn't always make sense. It's just like run on
yeah.
sentences and words and things like that. And I felt like I needed to understand it more to be able to write about it. But really, I needed to write about it to understand it more. So it's funny how that works.
I actually really connect with that because when you don't understand something that's going on inside of yourself and then you're just going to write a bunch of stuff down, which is what stream of conscious, like it, write that kind of writing, just which is what we did in like creative writing class and stuff, like
Right.
duh, that's what we did. That's how you come up with the idea. Like, but
Right.
I just thought it was interesting. That's why I wanted to ask you that, because it feels like you weren't giving yourself that permission. And that's why therapy and having a third party is so helpful, because just saying one thing in a certain way can just crack you wide open. It's really helpful.
And that's what I find too, because writing is extremely therapeutic for me in general. And I always say I like to put my issues into my children and then let them figure out my mess for me. Because even just removing yourself and thinking about it from a third person point of view, like I write characters and I am writing that character and that character is coming from my brain, but somehow I can learn things through those characters by just removing myself from
Yeah.
my own issues. And it's like my favorite part about it is that I've learned really cool things about myself that I wouldn't have learned if I just sat there and like made myself think about myself. I just put it into someone else and figured it out. So I think it's kind of
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about what we touched on earlier in the episode, Catherine, because you just brought up so many things and I'd love to dive deeper into this about being the only surviving sibling. I think this is your story is that, right? You're the only surviving sibling. You had a very close relationship with Colin. And I loved how you were sharing, like we've touched on some things, but would love to dive deeper into this and share your perspective and what advice you would have to an only surviving sibling, because it comes up so much. You guys ask me about this all the time. And when I'm live on social and things like that, it just comes up a lot. So I'd love for you to give your insight and how that's been for you over the past 5-6 years of your loss and this journey of losing Colin so quickly to cancer, and this rare cancer that usually a 23, 24-year-old does not pass away from. So while it's a story of anticipatory loss, it's a very quick anticipatory loss and a very young loss. And so let's dive into that. How is it being the only surviving sibling? And there's challenges that come up too. Like, I'm sure you think about this, like you're sharing about kids. So feel free to dive into that. And then that pressure, and also you're going to have the pressure of taking care of your parents as they grow older. And yeah, share that with
Yeah.
us. I'd love to hear your perspective.
It's so complicated too because everyone has such different relationships with their parents based on how they grew up. When Colin died, I really hit that life is so, so short. If I want to get a tattoo, I'm going to get a tattoo. And if I want to dye my hair purple, I'm going to dye my hair purple because I don't know what tomorrow is going to be and I don't know what next year is going to be. And that required a fair amount of therapy and a fair amount of deconstruction of what my childhood was. I don't want to spend 6 hours talking about that, but there was a lot of there's still reparenting that's going on between him and I, or between myself and my past self. And that was one of the hardest parts of losing him, is the one other person that knew my childhood like I did, I didn't have anymore. So now I had to try and figure it out without having a backboard to bounce things off of. It really involved me just becoming tremendously more myself. I like to say I was an emotional ditto, like the Pokemon that just like morphs shapes into whatever like it needs to blend in. You're with one group of friends and you're one person. You're with one group of friends and you're a different kind of person, to the point where I needed to learn to just be whoever I was. And I needed to figure out who I was and what I loved to do and what was worth living for and what wasn't worth being anxious about. Because if I didn't have that, then I feel like I would have maybe reverted, like, for instance, sorry, I'm rambling. My family's still in Virginia. I'm in Florida. My husband and I made the move about 8 months ago. Big move. Sold our house, bought a house down here, 14 hours away, changed our jobs and all of that. And that's not,
Congratulations, though. That's awesome. Yeah.
it was a process, but now it's beautiful and there's beaches here and there's no snow. So
Yeah.
hopefully there's no snow. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't taken a step back and almost established boundaries more before I started letting them back in. And when you're establishing boundaries in the wake of loss, it feels like a really crappy thing to do because
Yeah.
you're like, all my parents need are me. Who am I to put that distance between me and my parents when there's already so much distance from this loss in our life? But I had to create the boundary before I could like before I could let them in. I had to like build up the boundary first. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that really just involved me being what I call selfish, which is really just self-care. But I grew up thinking that self-care was selfish. So I just
So you were rewiring all of that, Katherine, which I think you should be really proud of. And I understand that too. Because, I think it's ingrained in us that putting yourself first and taking care of yourself. And you are literally describing what so many siblings, not even just the only surviving sibling, like so many siblings describe. They're like, well, I don't want to not speak to my mother during this time because she lost her son or she lost her daughter. But the reality is, you're hitting on such a big point here. We're no good to anybody if we aren't taking care of ourselves. And so I really love this part of your story where you realized, I don't want to morph into this person or morph into this group. Like, I want to be Katherine and I want to be very true to myself. And like, I feel like this is how you're not only honoring yourself, but honoring your brother, which I think is pretty amazing.
I think he would be, because he was definitely, I was more of a follower, like when growing up, and he was much more of the, I'm going to just take off and see what fits best for me. It was just how we were. And I'm definitely adopting more of what I think he would have done. So I'm like, he'd be okay with that. And I think he'd be really proud of me because it's tons of work. And when you go to therapy every week and then you have your day job and you're like, oh, my day job is so exhausting. It's the 40 hours. And then you realize that every other hour during the week, you're working on yourself. And you're like, okay, it doesn't seem like a big deal at the time. And then you look back a year or two later and you're like, okay, that was a lot of hard work that I did, even though it didn't really feel like it. It just felt like it was really tough the whole time.
You nailed it. Yeah, it is a lot of hard work. And it's so interesting because you were talking about feeling selfish by doing that, but like it's self care. But it's actually not selfish at all. And I'm sure this is where you're going with this too, because it's actually pretty amazing to go into therapy or however you want to deal with this. But I'm like you, I did therapy and really look at like do I like who I am? What parts don't I like? How am I going to heal these parts where I've made mistakes? Maybe other people have made mistakes. How am I going to prioritize myself? It's hard work. But like you said, when you look back 6 months, a year, 2 years after the work you've done, you become the person that you knew you could be, or even a person that you never knew you could be in such a positive way.
Yeah.
And it's life changing. And it's such an amazing thing to do, especially when you've gone through a significant loss like losing Colin.
It's a feeling of empowerment. I think that's when I left my therapist in Virginia. I'd been seeing him for about 4 years. And he's like, how do you feel now based on how you felt in 2021? And I was like, I just like myself now. And I honestly wasn't sure if I could have said that before. Just, and it wasn't even one thing that I liked more, or one or another. But I think it's just the being able to say I'm proud of myself and not have it come off as like, I don't feel like I have to apologize for my ego anymore when I say I'm proud of myself. I feel like I can just say it and know it and believe it and not have to defend why I think I'm so proud of myself. Just say that I am. That's just, yeah, I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't gone through all of this. I think I would still be very much whatever the outside, I thought the outside world needed me to be instead of just me.
Right. Right. You've like found this deeper relationship with yourself through this
Yeah.
process.
Yep.
I think that's amazing. What other things have come up for you before we move on to a few other questions I have for you? But what other things? So you've had some boundaries that you've had to put in place with your parents and take that back. But have you thought about these questions that I get all the time from the only surviving sibling, like what that's going to look like many years down the road? You already mentioned you had a conversation with your mom that you don't want to have children,
Yeah.
and because that was a pressure that you were feeling. Are there other things that come up for you too?
Sort of. It's not so in the end, my husband Mike and I want to foster, to like foster to
Good for
adopt.
you.
We both seen kids that just need so much love in
Yeah.
whatever amount of time that we can give it to them. So we're not sure if we would adopt in the future or if we just want to foster. But it was, and we had thought about that before too, but really it was a matter of biological,
Yeah.
passing on, which is what I brought up with her. But in their own way of coping, my parents moved my surviving grandparents closer to us after my brother died. And that definitely, it's been a challenge. It was my dad's mom and my mom's two parents. Moved them from Florida and Kentucky to Virginia. And they're having a time, but they're older. And my grandparents are all in their 80s and 90s now. And my parents, they said they've learned from this. They're like, we're never going to put you in a situation like our parents have put us in, because they have to deal with, there's just logistics and there's just all this stuff. And because my parents have been and I have been where we've been, we understand what matters and we understand the end of life and we understand. And so they're like, we're going to make sure that you don't have to be the one moving us around all over the place. We're going to find a place and we're going to stay there because it's going to be healthier for everyone. And I thought about a little bit at the very beginning of, oh my God, I'm going to have to somehow help both of my parents retire with absolutely no help. But my husband's wonderful. I know that he'd be there to help me out with it. And also, now that they've seen this, and both of my grandfathers are now passed, so they've taken care of that, and they've seen everything with my brother. So they have a unique insight into what is important and what can maybe be shed to the side that isn't. So I'm not nearly as worried as I was. Not
I
nearly.
think that's awesome. I
Yeah.
think that's awesome. It's not awesome that they obviously had to go through a lot to get there, but that's awesome
Peace
for
of mind for
you.
everybody,
Yeah.
for them, for me, for anyone else, anyone else in our family. It's just a peace to know that we're all on the same page, and it's all just about genuine quality and love, and not necessarily where they are or what, if they're in a facility or if they're in a different state or whatnot. It's just the base of just like everyone should just be there and love each other and know what's important and no extra fluff, anything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that because all these things that you think about or that come up when you're the only surviving. It's a unique experience. Like we talk about losing a sibling here on the show, but then there's all these individual experiences about how you lost your sibling and then where you are in the family and then what your relationship was like, right? And so it's important to give that perspective. So tell us a little bit about where you are today and how you're moving through this. You've shared quite a bit, but therapy has been a major part for you as it is for me
Yes.
too. And I think that's great. But tell us a little bit about how you are today. And this comes to mind too. Another question I get a lot too, Katherine, is your husband is super supportive. So has he always been really understanding? So it's a two-parter for you, where you are today. And then also we love any insight you're comfortable sharing about your husband, because this comes up a lot too. Like, how does your spouse deal with it? How the loss, and how have they been supportive, or maybe you've had to grow into that support? I think you're a great person to touch on that as well.
Definitely. Well, now we're completely like life. We like to say that we had a vast number of crises in the first 10 years we've been married. We're married 10 years in October. And we're like, we need to
Oh.
have maybe one crisis at a time now instead of multiple ones piled on top.
Mm-hmm.
He's also the older sibling. He has one younger sister who's about 3 years younger than he is. So it's actually a pretty similar age gap there. In the moment, he didn't understand it, but also I didn't understand it. And I couldn't expect him to if I couldn't. He did his absolute, I know he did his absolute best, whether it came across as that or not. It was such an impossible thing. Like, if the roles were reversed, I can't even imagine how my relationship with him would have been if his sister was sick and all that. So he supports in the way that love languages are different. He supports in his own way, and he loves me in his own way. And I know that he read for my dad at the memorial service. My dad was like, I can't read about this. And he asked Mike to do it. And so he did do it. He's like, I didn't really like it because it was sad and terrible, but I did it because I love you and I love your family. And I was like, excellent. And so now it doesn't come up as often in day-to-day conversations, but if I ever am really upset or it's just something's triggered me or whatever, he always just lets me process my emotions like I do. And I know that he's there. We don't talk about all the time, but I know that if I were to sit him down on the couch and be like, I saw something today on Facebook and it made me really sad, he would be there for me for that.
And I think that's like, thank you for sharing that. But I think that's really what it's about. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, and no one's ever going to understand 100% of what you went through, because you're Katherine losing
Right.
Colin. No one's
Exactly.
ever going to. But I
Exactly.
think it's great. I do think it's great he has a sister, so at least he understands, okay, that dynamic. But again, it's so individual, this loss, and every loss really is. And so I think it's great that he's there, ready to listen. And how sweet for him to read that for your dad. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That definitely meant a lot. We'd been married for not even 4 years at that point. So it was, yeah, he was as not stonewall, but as like stony faced as he can be. He is a pillar, and I know that he's there whether he tells me it or not. He is, and that's I believe that's what his dad is with his mom, and that's how he is with me, where you don't always openly know that someone is there for you, but when you need to fall down, there's someone there, and that means everything.
That means everything. That's all you could ask for, right? That's amazing. Yeah, so let me ask you this, because a lot of people, when I talk about things, people will say, how did you process? And I was always a journal. And then again, I connected with that part in your story, because I feel like that was a green flag for me to be like, okay, it's a red flag for me, but green flag to go back to therapy. Because I'm
Right.
like, I'm not writing, and I have like 2 degrees in English and writing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is crazy, right? But I would love to hear your perspective, and then we'll talk about where people can connect with you on social and stuff. But I hear this a lot where people are like, well, journaling doesn't work for me. And I'm like, look, I'm biased, right? And I know you are too. I think it works for everybody. But how would you tell somebody that's like, I can't journal, everyone can journal. So what are some things people can do? I have some ideas in my mind, but how would you get somebody started so their juices are flowing and they can just get it down on paper? Because I think it's so healthy for everyone to do this.
I'm a big letter writing person. I tried writing to Colin as a letter for about a year after he died, and it was awful. I couldn't stand it. I was like, I don't want to think about writing to you because I can't, and you keep popping up in my Facebook memories, and I hate all of this stuff. And in my case, I had written so much before that I was able to take previous things that I had written and kind of redo them with the terrible knowledge I had all of a sudden. But I think I also really like making lists. So if you were to put at the top of the list things that I miss, and then you just write a list of those, and each of those words or those phrases is going to trigger something in your head, and then you can write that down from there. I think there's a great power in single word, like forcing yourself to put just down a single word. It's like if I put down the word like ska music, the phrase ska music, then I can talk about all the concerts that he and I went together, and I can talk about all the first CDs we listened to together on the road trips and things like that. And it goes along with this, but it's also really going to hurt for a little bit. It still does when I write about it, when you get into the headspaces of right before and right after. And that's okay, because feeling pain just means that you can still feel something.
I could not have said that better myself, Katherine, because I think sometimes we are afraid. I was wondering if you were going to get to this and you nailed it. I think people are afraid to journal because they don't think they have anything to say. We all have stuff to say. And then when we start to actually journal or start to make a list, or like, I love that idea. I love the idea of doing like a timer too. Like if you think you can't write,
Mm-hmm.
throw 3 minutes up there, throw a minute up there, start small, and just you'll be surprised how much comes out of you when you do something like that. Or throw in your favorite song and say, I'm just going to write for this song. And what are songs? 3 minutes? And like, yeah, see what comes out of you. But I think sometimes when we start to do it, it can be painful, but it can be joyful. And I think it can be a way for you to feel when you're feeling so numb too from a loss like this. So you really hit the nail on the head there too.
That
Katherine,
was okay.
tell us where we can connect with you on social and or email. Where can people reach out to you? We'll put it in the show notes too for you.
Sure. I'm on many socials, though I'm not active on as many of them anymore, just because they all have sad news and I try and be of the surroundings.
Mhm.
But I'm under my first and last name. You can find me on Facebook, X, Tumblr, Reddit. My work, my you might want to you can put my personal email in the show notes if you want to.
We will do that, Katherine. Perfect. And just say your name out for them if they're just listening, if for your socials or for your handle or where you want people to find you.
So my first name is Katherine, and my last name is Mandzak, Mand as in dog, Zak.
Perfect. And it's Katherine with a K, everyone. Perfect. All right. We'll put it in the show notes too. Katherine, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing Colin with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.